This meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 43 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Finance, pursuant to Standing Order 108(2). Committee is meeting on the subject matter of Bill C-19, an act to implement certain provisions of the budget tabled in Parliament on April 7, 2022, and other measures. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of November 25, 2021. Yes, I'm in my remarks, MP Fast.
That's okay. He's entitled to put up his hand and be
Per the directive of the Board of Internal Economy on March 10, 2022, all those attending the meeting in person must wear a mask except for members who are their place during proceedings. I'd like to take a few comments for the benefit of witnesses and members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raised hand function. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can, and we appreciate your patience and understanding in this regard. I request that members and witnesses mutually treat each other with respect and decorum. And so, in this first hour on committee business, the hands up right now that I see are MP Beach, then MP Sainte-Marie, and then MP Stewart. So, MP Beach, you have the floor.
No. Point of order. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, members.
Point of order. Point of order.
Point of order over here. Mr. Chair, MP Beach was not even online, let alone having his hand up. So his hand is not up first.
MP
Mine
Beach
was up first. No, let me speak.
No, that is not a point of order.
It is
sorry,
a point
MP
of
Stewart,
order.
that is not
I'm
a point
in the
of
room.
order.
It is
that
a point
of order.
Let me finish. I was here first. They didn't show up. My hand was up first. It should be recognized first.
MP Stewart, that is incorrect. You
are
not,
serving
you were
in
not
poor
here
faith
first.
right now. This is poor faith on behalf of the chair.
Okay, MP Beach, you have the floor, and then
Point of
MP
order.
Sainte-Marie, and then MP
Another
Stewart.
point of order.
Another point of order, MP Fast.
Mr. Chair, could you seek some counsel from our officers here at the table as to whether you can actually recognize a hand that goes up before the meeting is even formally in session? The only individual that I know that had his or her hand up after the meeting was called by you, right here at this table, a couple of minutes ago, was my colleague over here.
Well, MP Fast, I don't think you were looking at the screen. I was looking at the screen. And
I was looking at the screen.
The first hand up, MP Fast, this is how I saw it, was MP Beach's hand was up, then MP Sainte-Marie,
No.
then MP Stewart, then MP.
You're making that
Blakey.
up, Mr.
That
Speaker,
is
with
exactly
respect.
what
I
happened.
was looking at Mr. Beach the whole time.
The same point of
He
order.
did not
on
have
the same
his...
point of order, MP Blakey.
Hold it. Could I finish my point of
Never
order?
said Beach's hand.
You suggested that Mr. Beach had his hand up after you called the meeting. I was looking at him the whole time. And what you're saying is patently false. And the evidence will show that.
No, the evidence will show that MP Beach's hand has been up.
No.
It was up.
It
yes.
was not up after you called the meeting.
It was up. It was up, MP
This
Fast.
is a disgrace. If this is how you're going to conduct yourself, Mr.
Okay, I've got a number
Mr.
of
Chair,
points of order.
it's shameful.
MP Blakey.
On the same point of order, I mean, I think if some members are unhappy with the speaking order that you've proposed, the appropriate thing to do would be to challenge the chair, and we'll have a vote on whether to sustain your ruling or not, and then we can move on.
Good.
It's the way to resolve it.
Okay, good point, MP Blakey. Thank you. MP Chattel.
Yes, on the same point of order, I'd like to echo what my colleague, Mr. Blakey, just said and point the behavior point of order. I'm just learning how to do proper committee meeting, and challenging the integrity of a member is a point of order, and that should not be allowed in committee. So I agree with.
Thank you. MP Chattel.
So I agree with
Is that a point of order?
point of order,
Yes,
yes.
okay, yes,
I'm going to
MP Stewart.
challenge your decision, and I would also petition the clerks to find out the time of which MP Beach actually logged on, because his face was not on the screen, and if his hand was up, his face would have been in the middle of the screen, where it is now. And you yourself, as chair, said that it was MP St. Marie's hand that was up first, and I was second. Then you changed your own opinion and put MP Beach in the number 1 spot, which means you are literally
No,
acting
that
in
is
poor
incorrect.
faith in this.
That was-
It's not incorrect, and it's going to be on the video.
That
And
is-
that's the best part of it.
that is incorrect,
That's the best
MP
part
Stewart.
of it, Mr. Chair,
No.
because everybody's going to watch it. It's going to be awesome.
Look, there's been a challenge of the chair.
The question is, shall the decision of the chair be sustained? So if you're in favor of the chair, you vote yes. If you're against, you vote no. Mr.
Mr. Clerk, could I just get a clarity on specifically the ruling that is being challenged here? If you could read it back.
Well, I think my understanding with the chair's prerogative, the chair's ruling was that it was Mr. Beach first, Mr. St. Marie second, and Mr. Stewart third. Is that correct?
That is correct. That is correct.
No, that was his ruling.
That
not,
is my
I-
ruling.
No,
I'm
that's
taking-
not what he said, though. He said St. Marie, then me,
No, no,
which
MP
was
Stewart.
also incorrect.
I actually clarified with the clerk that MP Beach was up first, and I did get that clarification that MP Beach was up first.
No, you didn't. It's ridiculous.
But yes, I did.
You'll be investigated too, maybe, like Trudeau. Maybe you can be investigated. There's lots of them going around.
Okay, Mr. Baker,
In favor of the chair.
Mr. Beach,
In favor of the chair?
Madame Châtel,
In favor of the chair?
Ms. Derowitz,
In favor of the chair?
Mr. McDonald,
In favor of the chair.
Mr. Albus,
Opposed?
Mr. Chambers,
Opposed?
Mr. Fast,
Opposed?
Mr. Stewart,
Opposed.
Monsieur Sainte Marie,
Contre?
Mr. Blakey,
In favor.
Yeas pour 6, nays contre.
MP Stewart, please respect decorum. We've had to.
Respect the members then, Mr.
Yeah.
Chair. Respect the members.
MP Stewart.
Respect the
we've-
members.
We've had to call you out a number of times in meetings on your antics. So again, respect and decorum for this committee and for the members and for your colleagues. So we are moving to the floor. MP Beach, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, members. As I was saying before, I hope everyone had a tremendous Mother's Day. As we all know, I circulated a motion last week with regards to our study on the Budget Implementation Act. After speaking with members from all parties, I believe we have a majority support to proceed in this manner. I therefore move the motion as circulated. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, MP Beach. Point of order from MP Albus.
So my understanding is we are not to refer to in-camera sessions and the business that is done therein. I'd like you to consult with the clerk on that point, because my understanding is when a motion or a conversation happens in camera, it is extremely rare for it suddenly to be the business of an open committee. So I would just like to know, through yourself, Mr. Chair, through consultation with that, I don't believe the motion is in order.
Point of order.
Thank you, MP Albus. MP Beach, you can move it again as a motion. And I've got MP Zerowitz on a point of order.
Mr. Chair, I don't think that you refer to anything that was in the proceedings that were done in camera. And also, I think we should just note that the motion that Mr. Beach is about to read has been distributed by the clerk.
Mr. Chair, just to be clear, I was speaking to MP Beach, not yourself.
Okay, thank you, MP Albus. MP Beach now.
Let me just correct that, Mr. Chair, and I was also referring to Mr. Beach as well. Sorry, he wasn't referring to anything that was in camera.
MP Zerowitz,
In-
thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and MP Beach, is that it? Okay, so I am now, I've got hands up. I've got MP Sainte Marie and then MP Stewart.
Oui, merci,
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Chair, I'm going to speak to the motion. Since we had discussions beforehand, this Budget Implementation Act has hundreds of pages, and my intention here is to ask the colleagues of the committee that we ensure that we take the time to thoroughly study the implications of each part of the motion. During the pandemic, the House adopted quickly many acts and many bills, and we had to come back with corrections because we did not have the time to study all of the implications of the bills that were proposed. So there's just a question of paid leave that's coming back with C-19 because it was inadequately formulated. There were many elements in the current bill, and one of my main concerns is the application of the luxury tax. As I've often said, as many colleagues have also said, I do agree with the principle, but I have some grave concerns with respect to the impact that we haven't taken into consideration for the manufacturing sector. There was no study, impact study that was done, and so I think the Conservatives brought up the impact that this would have on ship building industry, and I brought up the impact of the air construction. So I think that we need to bring modifications so that the manufacturing sector will be not too affected by this new tax. But as I was saying, we do understand the intention of the government to adopt this bill by the end of the session. But since there are an enormous amount of elements, I think either we need to take the time in committee to have more time to study every element, and I would like to ask my colleagues that deal with different files to come with their witnesses to ensure that everything is adequate. And the other solution, and it's been done in the past, would be to separate this study into different committees. I think that would be the Standing Committee on International Trade could look at it, at the Standing Committee on Industry could also look at aspects. Also, Human Resources could look at 26, 27, and what all that is involved with employment insurance. And so I know that other committees are doing a lot of work, that they have a heavy load with their studies, but I think that this is a major bill of the government that really merits that we give it our attention. So with respect to Mr. Beach's motion, right now, I think that I would be uncomfortable with the end of the session, which were the timing of that, when we would approve something when we haven't had the time to look at all of the implications of the impact of Bill C-19. So I think it would be important to remove that part. And I also think we should divide the study into different committees, and I understand what that would imply for other committees, but I think that it is necessary to be able to come to the desired end. So I would like to propose an amendment to the motion. I have not written it out at this point, but it would be to separate the study of the bill into the committees that I mentioned. I can name them again by speaking slowly if everybody would be in agreement. So for Part 5, that Section 9 would go to the International Trade Committee. And still in Part 5, Sections 15, 16, and 17 to the Industry Committee, and to HUMA for Human Resources, and for people with disabilities, Sections 26, 27, 29 and 32, and that's still in Part 5, to Immigration, Part 23, and to Justice, Sections 18, 19, 20, and 22. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Saint-Marie.
MP Stewart up, then MP Fast, then MP Albus.
No, I'm not up.
On the amendment?
On the amendment?
Are you at discussion on the amendment? Is this what you wanted to speak to?
No, the amendment
on
hadn't
the
even been
amendment.
tabled.
Is anybody speaking to the amendment? Discussion on the amendment.
I'll speak to the amendment, Mr. Chair, but my original hand raise was to speak about the actual main motion. So I'm going to just ask MP St. Marie just to repeat, because I totally sympathize when suddenly the parliamentary secretary puts forward a motion effectively programming the committee. A lot actually happens in my mind, Mr. Chair. Immediately it pops up and I say, what? Isn't this the government that actually promised that they were going to free up the independence of committees by removing parliamentary secretaries from their proceedings? And of course, we know, like many promises, turns out that they actually don't like the outcomes that happen. And so here we are today, Mr. Chair, where we are right back to where a parliamentary secretary is actually programming the who, what, when, where, and why. Well, we all know why. It's because he's in a mood, and so is his minister, to see this BIA study, done in a way that fits their timetable, not the delicate proper scrutiny of such a large piece of legislation. But again, to MP St. Marie, I concur that there is some concerns here with the government suddenly bulldozing in with this approach. If he could please name the committees, Mr. Chair, individually which ones that he would like it split out to, and then maybe if he could give a few.
Again, Mr. Albas just referred to what happened in camera, so same point of order that you referred to earlier.
I don't understand, Mr. Chair. Maybe you can rule on that, because I made no mention of any in-camera conversation.
MP Chatel, in terms of we should not be speaking about what happens in camera.
Okay, so thank you, Mr. Chair. So to go back to my original point, again, the Liberals had promised that committees would be independent. They've moved now to where parliamentary secretaries are actually pushing forward and programming the Budget Implementation Act. And MP St. Marie, who's a very thoughtful member of Parliament, we come from different sides, Mr. Chair, but we don't always agree on everything. But I do have to get back to his original point about the need to properly scrutinize what is a big bill. And I understand completely that his constituents, particularly those in the aerospace sector, are going to have some concerns around the luxury tax components of this bill. But he's also raised some concerns around different categorization or different parts of the bill. So maybe if the member, and I'm sorry to have to repeat myself, I was interrupted earlier, could the member please list out which committees that he would like to see study and which parts of the bills and his rationale for each one? That would be helpful to my understanding. Thank you.
Not sure whose hand went up first, MP Samari or MP Beach. Okay. Not sure if MP Beach's hand or MP Samari's hand went up first. Did you guys see?
Terry a levé la main avant moi.
He raised his hand first, but the question was posed to me.
Beach was speaking to the amendment, but MP Samari, go ahead. Yes, please.
Okay, donc.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Albas, for your comments. As I said, right now, I'm against putting a limit to this bill. I think that there needs to be a second amendment with the present amendment. What I suggest, so that we can best study the bill, would be to divide it into different committees. So what I proposed was, first, Section 9 of Part 5 would go to international trade. Section 9 modifies the importation, so we need to ensure that there would not be unwanted effects on industries in Quebec and across Canada, and all of that be properly studied. If the Finance Committee studied it, we would really need to spend a lot of time. So the first division would be Section 9 of Part 5. That would go to the International Trade Committee. The second would be to send Sections 15, 16, and 17 of Part 5 to the Industry Committee. Section 15 is on the modification of the Competition Act. So we know the Competition Act is it's one of the weakest across the G7 countries, and so I think it's important, and I think it's a good thing to modify, but I don't know if what is being proposed is enough to really make a difference. So that's for Section 15. Section 16 would also go to the Standing Committee on Committee, and that has to do with copyright law to prolong the duration. So that would be the industry committee that would have the expertise. And it's the same thing for Part 5, Section 17, which has to do with the College of Patents Act, Agent and Trademark Agents Act. So that, I think, would take several sessions. Now, for the HUMA committee, which is for human resources and social development and peoples with disabilities, all of the sections that have to do with AI and paid leave. So we're talking about sections 26, that's for the employment insurance changes. Section 27 also has changes, modifications, and Section 29 modifies the criminal code, and we also have the reduction of leave for medical reasons. So that part is not directly involved with employment insurance, but it has Section 19 has to do with paid leave. And there's also Section 32, and that is for the board, the appeal board for employment insurance. So I think that we would need to see several witnesses, and there's much study that needs to be done. So for sections 26, 27, 29, and 32 of Part 5, I think they should be sent to HUMA. Section 23 needs to go to immigration. That modifies the Act on the Immigration and Refugee Protection. So they have the expertise there, and that would save some time. And also to the Justice Committee, there would be sections 18, 19, 21, and 22. So section 18, that has to do with the Civil Gateway. And so I think that there would be implications there for Justice Committee. Section 19 modifies the Act on the correctional systems having to do, and so I don't think that it would be the Finance Committee that would have the X-ray experience or expertise on X-rays of body cavities, and so you also have Section 21, and that is a criminal code modification, and so I think that should go to justice also, just as Section 22 that modifies the Judges Act and the Canadian Tax Court and other legislation. So this is my proposition. So I hope that I have responded sufficiently to the question of colleague Ambas. Thank you, MP Sainte-Marie.
Also on the amendment? Yep. MP Beach?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a quick question for my colleague, Gabriel. You expressed in your initial statement that you're uncomfortable with a deadline, but we are operating in an environment where we have deadlines and parliamentary procedures and constrained House resources. Would you be open to setting a deadline for the response from committees, say May 20th, and that those responses be in writing? Is that something that you'd be open to?
Monsieur le Président, est-ce que je peux répondre maintenant?
Mr. Chair, can I answer now?
Okay. Donc,
yes. So, Terry, I understand the imperative and the idea to be able to study this and to get this done before we leave for the summer. But as I explained earlier, right now, I would not be ready to support a deadline for this study and limits to this study. And I think that the aspects should be given to other committees. So with respect to this amendment, I don't think since we still haven't voted with respect to the second reading in the House, I would think that it would be a little bit rushed to set a deadline for other committees to come back. But we could speak about the end of May or the beginning of June. I could live with that. But I think it's important that we work in a consensual fashion here in committee. So as I was saying, I would prefer to vote for another amendment for the with respect to deadlines. But if MP Beach wants to propose that we include a deadline for the other study of other committees, I could approve that, yes. Thank you.
So I have on the list here MP Albus, MP Chambers, MP Fast on the amendment.
So, Mr. Chair, just because MP St. Marie did receive Mr. MP Beach's counter proposal, and then said, I'd like to maybe look at June, maybe if we could just have the parliamentary secretary please just maybe respond to that, because that would have some bearing on my intervention here.
MP Beach?
Happy to respond. We'd still be looking for a May 20th deadline.
So, unfortunately, Mr. Chair, the parliamentary secretary has gone from trying to tell just this committee what to do to now telling multiple House of Commons committee how to do their work. And in fact, Mr. Chair, I think you would know out of all people, having worked so closely with the clerk, because everyone wants to come to finance. We're one of the busiest committees. There are other committees, such as industry, that are extremely seized as well. And to suddenly say, okay, you have 11 days to report back on major areas where members would have to stop what they're doing and immediately start a call for witnesses, and then immediately start planning sessions. By the time they even got probably to the first meeting, Mr. Chair, we already would have hit that hard deadline of May 20th. That is patently unfair to those other committees. So I totally understand the member from the Bloc Québécois, MP St. Marie, honorably trying to do his job, Mr. Chair, trying to work with, to try and find a way so that he can have his concerns, raised in front of those different committees. But you know what, Mr. Chair, Conservatives have been taking a different approach right from the start. You will know that we've been bringing in shadow ministers who have specific responsibilities to ask questions specifically of C-19, of the officials. We will continue to do that. But I think that, unfortunately, for my friend from Quebec, MP St. Marie, even though his heart and his temperament are 100% in the right place, to have the parliamentary secretary now compound the damage that I think that this government is doing to the independence. And you'll remember last week, Mr. Chair, you were there in question period when I asked specifically the Minister of National Revenue, would she support a Conservative motion, my colleague MP Stewart's motion about the concerns of allegations around advanced pricing arrangements at CRA. She said, oh, well, the member knows that we don't take opinions at all who comes before committee. Well, I guess the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance certainly doesn't mind telling the Finance Committee what to do, and her Parliamentary Secretary sure doesn't seem to mind to tell other committees what to do. I think that's a bit of a shameful process. Look, I'm not going to make it personal. I know that Mr. Beach, as a Parliamentary Secretary, has a job that he's given, but I would simply suggest to him to maybe reflect on the points, because it's a long way from when he was elected in 2015, Mr. Chair, for when parliamentary secretaries could come into the room and listen to the debate, maybe have conversations on the sidelines with their other members of parliament, but they would not be voting members. That changed in 2019. They became voting members, and now it's changed yet again, Mr. Chair, where now we have a parliamentary secretary to the Minister of Finance, not just dictating what the Finance Committee will do, but actually multiple independent parliamentary committees at a drop of a hat. So I think it's not a good faith request that he's made of MP St. Marie. And I would not hold for 1 second, Mr. Chair. I would not hold Mr. St. Marie. I wouldn't hold him in any way, shape, or form it against him that he would be mad as heck at this government for how they are treating this parliamentary process and particularly this Budget Implementation Act in this committee.
Point of order,
So,
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair,
Point of order, MP Zerowitz.
Yes, I think Mr. Albus is no longer talking about the amendment that Mr. Samari is proposing. I think he's talking to how Mr. Beach has responded. And I wonder if he can get back to speaking to the amendment.
So we're speaking to the amendment. Yes,
Mr.
MP
Chair,
Albus.
I would ask you to rule on this because I was clearly speaking to the amendment that Mr. St. Marie put in good faith, only to receive a bad faith counteroffer. I think that is completely within committee business and completely germane to the conversation of the amendment put forward by the honourable member, MP St. Marie. Maybe you could rule on that, please.
Well, MP Albus, I do allow for leeway. I think you were giving us as I understood, a historical perspective, your historical perspective on what's happened over the last, 10, 15 years. But we'll stick and focus on the amendment.
15 years, Mr. Chair? I don't understand. I was speaking specifically to
Albus,
the motion to amend it.
Here and the history of PSs, et cetera.
2015, sir. And again, we have a parliamentary secretary who put forward a motion, and I was speaking.
Yes. Amendment.
And again, Mr. Chair, I was speaking directly that I would not hold it against this member who is trying, in his way, to work towards having better scrutiny of the bill, than to have a good faith response back from the parliamentary secretary. Again, like I said, I'm not holding it personally to MP Beach, but again, in this case, you can tell that it's the minister's office that is pressuring him to do that. So, Mr. Chair, I'm going to leave it here that Conservatives, we have a very straightforward approach. We won't be necessarily supporting the motion here by my colleague, but I support him. I support him in his desire to see better transparency and better scrutiny of this government's bill. Thank you.
Thank you, MP Albus. I have MP Chambers, MP Fast, MP Beach, MP Zerowitz is on my list. So MP Chambers, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's actually more of I don't know if it's an appropriate point of order, but since I have the chair, it's more of a question. In the fall, or just before we rose for the winter break, we passed a bill at committee, which was then swiftly passed through Parliament. And I guess my question is, what's the latest day at which we could pass the budget implementation bill and finish clause by clause and still pass this? Because I'm looking at a calendar and we're supposed to be here until June 23rd. So my question is, if we could do what we did in the winter, why are we putting these dates the end of May or May 20th by having individuals or committees report back? I mean, that's like a week and a bit from now. Some of these changes to the Competition Act and others are significant. I don't really think, what's the point of having a committee if we're going to, hamstring us in a way where we've shown before that we can kind of study and get something through right to the end. So I'm looking at the calendar. I see June 23rd. So more of a question for my colleagues, or perhaps, what's the last day we can send this from the committee and have it get passed before we rise on the 23rd of June?
Thank you, MP Chambers. We are on the amendment, and we're going to MP Fast, MP Beach, Zerowitz, and then MP Blakey.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to begin by noting that it was Conservatives on this committee that actually supported efforts to do a pre-study on the budget. So any suggestion that somehow the efforts by us or by the Bloc are to delay the passage of the budget are false and ill-advised. I note that Mr. Samari did preface his remarks when he proposed splitting up elements of this bill and sending those elements to different committees. He prefaced his remarks by saying that what he was opposed to fundamentally was putting limits on the bill. And I think what I have to draw from that reference is that he opposes limiting the ability of parliamentarians to do their job when it comes to analyzing the budget, analyzing the different components of the budget which are manifested in the different budget implementation legislation. I note that he is referring to taking Section 9 in Part 5, referring it to trade, Sections 15 and 17 to industry, Section 26, 27, 29, 32 to HUMA, 23 to immigration, and 18, 19, 21, 22 to the Justice Committee. And I understand why he wants to do that. For example, there is a reference in this bill to the establishment of a criminal code offense for activities created on the moon. Now, how is that a money-related issue? And that is the case for many pieces of this Budget Implementation Act. And I understand why he would want to refer elements to different committees that are better tasked to do that. But here we've got a situation where, because the government has violated its promise not to introduce omnibus bill, which this is, by violating that promise, it is now causing this committee significant scheduling problems, which the government is trying to resolve by simply ramming this stuff through without proper oversight. And that is irresponsible. I also note that the government actually promised not to put limitations on debate by not invoking closure. And yet we have seen this government do it regularly. So you understand why we as an opposition, the official opposition, would be incredibly frustrated by the sudden about turn this government has taken after making these promises to become more transparent and accountable, not only to parliamentarians, but to Canadians. So I am pleading with the parliamentary secretary, who has already approached me on a number of occasions to see if there's a way of moving this through expeditiously, to come forward with realistic, fair solutions that can allow this legislation to pass in a manner that still provides for proper oversight, but is timely in nature. I've not seen that from the parliamentary secretary. So far, he's been crafty. He's been trying to propose solutions that he knows very well we as an opposition cannot accept because it interferes with our constitutional right to exercise oversight over what is, at the end of the day, a $57 billion of new spending budget. Now, Canadians will understand that that kind of new money being spent by a government should have oversight, proper oversight, and for all those reasons,
Point
Mr.
of
Chair,
order, Mr. Chair.
I will be opposing
Point
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
of order, MP Zerowitz.
the main motion.
MP Zerowitz has just a
Mr.
point of order,
Chair,
MP Fast.
Mr. Chair,
MP Zerowitz, yes, point of order.
Mr. Chair, I would ask that Mr. Fast continue to talk to the amendment, which is what the topic of conversation is right now, the amendment that Mr. Samari has put on the table.
These interruptions are...
Well, Mr. Speaker, I was just winding up, and I think most people watching would have noticed that I was trying to wind up. But now that she has raised this point of order,
MP Fast, that's great.
Mr. Chair, of course, it gives me the right to respond to that point of order. All that to simply say, I've continually referenced back to Mr. St. Marie's efforts to spin out different elements of this budget implementation bill in order to make sure it goes to the committees that are best positioned to review those issues. And the reason that is the case is because this government has tabled an omnibus bill. This is not exclusively a spending and taxation bill, the way most budgets are. This is an omnibus bill that basically it's a grab bag of issues that the government has decided to push into a budget bill and is providing us with such frustration because we can't exercise the oversight that we're supposed to.
Thank you, MP Fast. I've got MP Beach, MP Zerowitz, MP Blakey. MP
Thank
Beach?
you. Hey, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all members for their comments, and certainly have been working diligently with all members, various phone calls over time to take into account all of the needs and wants and desires, including trying to get more study time than we've had on average over the previous 5 years. And listening to debate now, I've been feverishly working on language that I hope will meet the majority of needs for the committee. So I'd like to move a sub-amendment, I guess, to Gabriel's amended motion. And I think it would be best if I read in the entire language of a revised motion. And I got to get this over to the clerk as well. But let me read it and see if this meets the needs of members. It would be that A, the chair of the committee write as promptly as possible to the chairs of the following standing committees to invite them to study the subject matter of the following provisions of Bill C-19 and act to implement certain provisions of the budget tabled in Parliament on April 7th, 2022, and other measures. I, the Standing Committee on International Trade, Part 5, Divisions 9 of the bill. Double I, the Standing Committee of Industry and Technology, Part 5, Divisions 15, 16, and 17 of the bill. Triple I, the Standing Committee of Human Resources, Skills, and Social Development and the Status of Persons with Disabilities, Part 5, Divisions 26, 27, 29, and 32 of the bill. Subsection 4, so IV, the Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration, Part 5, Division 23 of the bill, subsection 5 or B, the Standing Committee on Justice and Human Rights, Part 5, Division 18, 19, 21, and 22 of the bill. B, for the standing committees listed in A, I, recommendations in relation to the provision considered by them in a letter to the chair of the Standing Committee on Finance in both official languages no later than 4 p.m. on Friday, May 20th, 2022. And double I, if a standing committee listed in A chooses not to consider the subject matter of the provisions, it advised the chair of the Standing Committee of Finance by letter in both official languages no later than 4 p.m. on Friday, May 13th, 2019. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, MP Beach. So this is a sub-amendment to the amendment to the main motion. Yeah.
Indeed.
Okay. I do have MP Zerowitz, MP Blakey, MP Chambers, MP Sainte-Marie, MP Fast.
Maybe on the sub-amendment?
On the sub-amendment? Yep. I think the members first had their hands up. MP Zerowitz, is this on the sub-amendment or the amendment?
Yes, I just want to make one small correction to what Mr. Beach had mentioned. I think he had said 2019, and I think he meant to say 2022.
Point of order, MP Fast.
Yes, Mr. Chair, could we suspend temporarily and allow Mr. Beach to send his amendment to the clerk so that it can be distributed?
Yeah, MP Beach, have
And
you
maybe Sainte-Marie as well.
have you sent it to the clerk already?
I am
Your
literally sending
sub-amendment?
it
Okay,
now.
you're sending it right now? Okay, we'll suspend for 2 minutes.
And can we also
Yeah.
have,
It's a good idea.
okay. We can also
Members, we are back. Has everybody received the distributed amendment and sub-amendment? Yes, okay. And I had MP Zerowitz up next. I do see, and then I have MP Blakey, then MP Chambers, and then MP Sainte-Marie, and then MP Albus. Okay, MP Zerowitz.
Mr. Chair, I'm actually not going to be speaking on the sub-amendment to the amendment to the original motion, so I'm okay to pass over to Mr. Blakey. Thank you.
Thank you. MP Blakey?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I mean, it seems to me that there are at least two issues that are entangled here in our discussion about study on the budget bill. On the one hand, there's the question of the timeline and how much time we're going to take to study the bill. And then there's the question of how we're going to proceed with the study, whether we're going to endeavor to study everything at this table or where we're going to break it up and send some aspects to other committees, presumably where, and I take Mr. Sainte-Marie's point, where members have been immersed in a subset of issues that have to do with some of the things in the bill and may very well be able to conduct a more efficient study. I believe Mr. Albus made some comments to that effect as well in terms of subject matter expertise. And I think sometimes certain members' objections to the timeline of the study are kind of, maybe getting entangled with the question of how we study things. So I think Monsieur Sainte-Marie does have, if we understand ourselves to be working on an expedited timeline, and I think we are. I mean, look, realistically, if the budget bill is going to pass by the end of June, then it does need to make its way out of the House in order to have enough time to be studied in the other place. Mr. Chambers earlier raised the example of Bill C-2, which did manage to pass relatively swiftly once it had come out of the committee. But I would raise the example of the bill on the fall economic statement, which just passed last week. We saw an incredible appetite on the part of the Conservative caucus to speak to that bill. It was part of the reason why New Democrats worked to try and provide a mechanism for extended sittings in May in order to have members of the opposition parties who wanted to say more on that bill and others to have the time to be able to do that. But I wouldn't say that the culture around here is one of expeditious passing of legislation once it comes out of committee. The C8 certainly proved that, I think, beyond any shadow of a doubt. So beyond any significant and demonstrable change in the culture, I think there is a legitimate concern that if this bill were to come out of committee late in the game, so to speak, and there's not that much left to go before summer, regardless of what we do at this table, then I think it does make sense to try and hasten the study of the bill while also providing for a lot of time to study it. And I mean, I think if we look at the main motion, the goal here is to have about 20 hours of study, which is on par with the last budget implementation bill and the study, frankly, of many budget implementation bills going back some way. So I do see an attempt here to try and make sure that there's enough time to do the study of the bill well by having extra meetings as compared to similar processes that have unfolded for similar budget implementation bills in the past. And I see this effort at trying to enable other committees to take a look at it, understanding that we're on a tight timeline, as an act of good faith to try and accommodate concerns that have been brought forward. And I think if memory serves, the sub-amendment even provides for other committees to let us know that they don't intend to study these provisions, with enough time for us then to try and arrange for some witnesses at this table so that there is still a study of those provisions. So it's why I think, and I'm also mindful of the fact, I mean, we're talking about, well, maybe I'll just leave it at that, Mr. Chair. All that to say that I think here we have a proposal to try and accommodate a concern by an opposition member that has been brought forward in order to try and access the expertise of other committees in order to try and help us do a better study on an expedited time frame. We do have an expedited time frame. It's hard to talk about that without making reference to the culture that has been unfolding in the House of Commons around the obstruction of legislation, or certainly members not feeling any need to let legislation pass or to allow us to come to a vote with debate collapsing. And so I think the sub-amendment is reasonable. I thank Monsieur Sainte-Marie for the amendment itself as a way to try and have some back and forth and negotiation about how we can do a better study in the time we have. And I'm supportive of the main motion, which I think is trying to recognize that for the budget bill to pass, it has to get out of committee with enough time for first the House to deal with it and then the Senate. We're really talking about 3 weeks, so a week and a half in each place before the end of June is what I would call a relatively tight timeline around here. So I don't think that unless people are of the view that the budget bill doesn't have to pass before summer, and we could drag it out in the way we saw the fall economic statement drag out. But I'm not of that view. I noticed what happened to teachers, for instance, when debate on C8 was prolonged, and they were being told by the CRA that they wouldn't get their tax filing back because there was still legislation pending. There's a number of items that will bear on a number of different industries in this bill. And what we're hearing from those stakeholders is that I think they'd want to know one way or the other how those things are going to land, whether it's on the luxury tax or other items. And so I think it does behoove us to try and deal with the bill swiftly, and it's why I'm supportive of the main motion, but also supportive of the amendment and the sub-amendment that have been proposed, because I think that's what it looks like when parliamentarians try to take the concerns of all parties at the table seriously and find the best path forward in the difficult circumstances we often find ourselves working in. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, MP Blakey. I do think you captured what we're talking about, that main motion, the amendment, the sub-amendment in terms of timelines and how we will study the bill. Members, you know what, we're talking about why we're doing this. We're doing this for the stakeholders. We're doing this for Canadians, for the witnesses, and we are coming up on the hour. I do have a number of speakers still. I've got MP Chambers, MP Sainte-Marie, MP Albus, MP Fast, but we are coming up as again on the hour, and we do have witnesses that I'm sure we would all like to hear from, because that's what we're here for. MP Chambers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I noticed that the date or the amendment, the sub-amendment that the Parliamentary Secretary has moved still keeps the date at the 20th of May, and I just seem that to be incredibly aggressive, even more aggressive than what the timelines are that we have sent through the main motion. So, we have a break week. It's unfortunate that the budget was tabled so late, but that wasn't a decision of this committee. That was a decision of the government, which date to pick the budget, which was also, the last day before a 2-week break period outside of the House. The 2009 budget in the financial crisis, when the world was falling apart, was delivered at the end of February. I don't know, it seems to me that the choice of the calendar and the timing is driven primarily by the government at this point. So I find the 20th of May to be incredibly aggressive to ask other committees to set aside what they're doing and all hands on deck to deal with this, the studies coming out of this committee. I think what we ought to be doing is saying, what are the priority areas, or where are the areas of most discomfort? And, the government should be thinking about potentially splitting the bill. I made that, I would put that forward for consideration. If there are competition provisions that people haven't seemed to be consulted on yet, that we want the industry committee to look at, well, maybe they can look at it over the summer. But to suggest that we need to do this and get it done because the government decided to introduce the budget at one of the latest possible dates, I guess we could have not had a budget. We did have a year of that. But I think that we need to be thinking about some more unique or special opportunities to make sure that some of these changes are actually tested. Like the Competition Act provisions, typically when you're gonna amend a Competition Act or something, you'd say you do a consultation, Then you'd say, thanks very much. You put forward the draft proposals of the actual amendments you'd like to make, and then you consult on that, and then you put them in a bill. So I don't know why we couldn't consult on that over the summer, and then also put that in the second budget bill if all of the stakeholders feel like there's been a lack of consultation. So, and asking the industry committee to do all of that within like a week and a bit seems incredibly ambitious on my front. The other point is, what are the other things that this committee is working on that we ought to be focused? There's some issues with CRA. There's some issues with an inflation study. Like, are we going to just pass this and then my concern is we're going to pass this motion. We're going to pass the budget through the committee. And then all of a sudden we're going to find ourselves with no more committee meetings to deal with some really important stuff. So I'm just worried about the aggressive timeline that we're asking ourselves. And I guess my question to the parliamentary secretary is, are you really held to the May 20th date, or is there some other later date that you would consider to keep us on a timeline that you're comfortable with? Because if not, I just, by virtue of just the date alone, I cannot support the sub-amendment.
Thank you, MP Chambers. I have MP Sainte-Marie, MP Albus, MP Fast.
Oui, merci.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I would like to thank Terry for having sent his sub-amendment. I did receive it in French also, so that's very much appreciated. And so I'm sorry myself to have not put in writing in both languages the amendment that I brought forward. So thank you, Mr. Chair, for having accepted it. So on the sub-amendment, of course, I do agree with the proposal to divide the bill up and to give it to different committees. I do have some reserves, however, with respect to the deadline, as I said earlier. I think politics is the art of compromise without comprising oneself. But I would have preferred, of course, as it has been said, that we do not have a deadline for the responses from the other committees or any kind of deadline. So that does bother me. But if this were to be the compromise that we would need to take, I would be willing to support it. But I'm not ready today to put a limit on the work of the Finance Committee on Bill C-19. So I'm ready to vote on the amendment and the sub-amendment, and I would like to bring another amendment to the main motion to withdraw, I believe it's Part B. Yes, so Part B would be removed so that there would be no limits. So we could come back to that when work is on the way and this other amendment could be looked at.
At a later time, but we have to deal with the amendment and the sub-amendment to the main motion first.
Yeah, I was going to raise a point of order on that, but
yes, yeah.
That's okay.
So,
thank you.
Merci, MP Sainte-Marie. Fini?
All right, thank you. MP Sainte-Marie, you're done? Yes.
Okay, merci. So we go into MP Albus, MP Fast, MP Zerowitz.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just have a couple of points I'd like to make. And perhaps you can also clarify by your read of it, Mr. Chair, of the latest sub-amendment by Parliamentary Secretary. Are we as a committee still able to hear testimony on those sections while those committees consider their choices? It seems to me that it's a little bit ambiguous, and I would like to have some sort of guidance as to, from your opinion, because we've put in good faith witnesses from a whole collection of backgrounds. And if a committee chooses not to do it, I don't want to be told, Mr. Chair, that we can't ask questions on that section because we're still waiting to hear back.
Let me interject really quickly, just check really quick. Of course, yes, you can. You can continue to hear from witnesses for any of those sections.
That's excellent. Now, the next question I would have with Mr. Chair is that obviously the committee itself has chosen to do a pre-study of Bill C-19. And so inevitably, the one may ask, particularly thanks to the confidence agreement and supply agreement that the NDP and the Liberals have, that if they were in such a mood, because we know when the Prime Minister gets in a mood, he gets what he wants. Is it possible that the House might just send the C-19 in its entirety to us, and where does that put our committee? Are we actually asking these committees to do clause by clause? And what if that's in conflict with the order from the House? If maybe you and the clerk could just speak to that. I don't want to agree to doing something, Mr. Chair, that ends up actually running against the House.
So we cannot ask another committee to do clause by clause, only subject matter.
Okay, so in essence, ultimately, all of us are going to have to monitor every single meeting that happens there, hear from the testimony, and then draw in amendments. To me, that doesn't seem like a great process. Had those committees had the ability to do clause by clause, that would make a lot more sense. Lastly, Mr. Chair, just because we do have witnesses that have come today, I believe you, Mr. Chair, in good faith, worked with the clerk to arrange for them. Perhaps what you can do is maybe arrange for a future committee business, and then we can just go to and show some respect for those witnesses that are here to speak to C-19 and prepared for that. So I move that we adjourn this debate and to allow you, Mr. Chair, to go to the witnesses.
Members? It's been moved to adjourn debate.
My understanding is that that's a dilatory motion that doesn't admit of debate, and we move right to a vote.
If there's a recorded vote or...
Okay. Yeah, we'll put the question. Is there a recorded vote?
Point of order, Chair. Point of clarification. What are we voting on? Sorry.
MP Baker?
Sorry, what are we voting on? Can you just clarify for me?
We are voting on to adjourn the debate and go to witnesses,
And go to
yes,
witnesses,
to a
okay.
second half of our meeting.
Mr.
Clerk?
Baker?
Opposed.
Mr. Beach?
No.
Madame Châtel?
Opposed.
Ms. Derowitz?
Sadly, no.
Mr. McDonald?
No.
Mr. Albus?
In favor.
Mr. Chambers?
In favor.
Mr. Fast?
In favor.
Mr. Stewart?
In favor.
Monsieur Sainte-Marie?
Oui.
Yes.
Blakey?
Opposed.
Nays contre? 6. Yes pour 5.
It was defeated. We'll continue with our committee business, and I still have MP Albus. You were up.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just want to, first of all, thank the witnesses that came prepared for being here today, and to please just let them know that it is no fault of their own that they received a request from the committee, and unfortunately due to the committee's internal affairs, we're not able to speak today. So I would ask you, Mr. Chair, is there going to be an opportunity for these witnesses to be reinvited to a future committee meeting? And should they be spending their time online waiting as we go through the various sub-amendment, amendment, and motion debates that we're having?
It's a good question, MP Albus. We'll be releasing the witnesses. So,
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
point of order, MP Beach.
I just wanted to raise the idea with members. I mean, I think that there's a very clear path on the sub-amendment and the amendment and everything else. If we were all to agree to go to a vote, I think we could actually get those votes done in like 4 minutes, see what the result is, and then we could go to our witnesses, which I know we're all hoping to hear from today. So as long as there's no obstruction, we could actually allow those witnesses to stay on and we could get to them today.
Thank you, MP Beach.
Would you like me to speak to him, Mr. Chair?
Well, the MP Beach said if if
I'd
members
be
are
happy to
interested,
speak.
but I have MP Fast up next, and this is on the sub-amendment, the amendment to the main motion.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just to respond to Mr. Beach, this is not about obstructing. This is about doing the job that we're called to do as parliamentarians, to exercise oversight over many billions of dollars of spending and many billions of dollars of taxation that is being imposed on Canadians. I wanted to add a few additional thoughts on both the sub-amendment and also the amendment itself. A number of colleagues have referred to an expedited timeline. The whole purpose for us having the space to be able to conduct our work here at committee is to make sure that we get it right. There are many things here before us as in the BIA that call for more probing. Things like the way charities are being treated and the direction and control element that is now being discussed both in the House and here at this committee. Unfortunately, we had witnesses available here today, and our Liberal friends, supported by our NDP coalition, decided they weren't going to hear from them, rather would carry on with their amendments and sub-amendments. And quite frankly, Mr. Speaker, I think it sends a terrible message to those who rely on this committee and this Parliament to do its work properly. Inconveniencing witnesses the way we just did is highly inappropriate, and they have a right to complain. That said, I did want to note also that notwithstanding complaints that somehow the process is being slowed down, the reality is not only did we as a Conservative opposition agree with all the other members at this committee to conduct a pre-study to expedite the process and get the Budget Implementation Act moving forward. We supported that process. Not only has that happened, the Senate itself is conducting a pre-study of the Budget Implementation Act. So in both houses of Parliament, we have an avenue where all the parties have cooperated to move this legislation through in an expedited manner. Yet can we get even an ounce of cooperation from the Parliamentary Secretary and his handlers? No, we cannot, which is really, really sad. There's only so much compression of timelines that should take place, and then you start undermining our ability to do our job properly. I mentioned the charitable sector. How about the wine industry that is crying foul against this government?
They're here.
How about the boating sector? How about the aerospace industry? How about the car sector? They're all screaming foul because how this government is implementing tax legislation. And it's not even the tax itself, it's how it's being implemented and failure to do proper economic impact assessments for each industry before taxation is applied. We had the witnesses here at our committee, officials from the Department of Finance and other departments of government, and they admitted that no economic impact assessment had been done for these taxes. So that's a big fail, Mr. Speaker. You should not be surprised, Mr. Chair, that we are wanting to do this in a proper way, and we want the time to do it properly. The Parliamentary Secretary hasn't come forward with a realistic plan to properly do a review of this bill. If Mr. Beach can come forward with an accommodation that works for all parties at this table, we will look at it seriously and with good faith. That I can assure him as the Shadow Minister for Finance. We will look at it in good faith. But he can't keep coming forward simply acting as a shill for the government which wants to ram this legislation through. That's unacceptable.
Mr. Chair.
Okay, MP Fast. I've got MP Zerowitz, then MP Blakey, then MP Albus, then MP Stewart. MP Zerowitz.
Thanks so much, Mr. Chair. I just want to say, and just for those who might be listening at home, for the budget study, it's always an intensive period after the budget is introduced. There's always a number of hours that are proposed. It's always very intensive. There's always additional meetings. And I just want to reiterate, and I think Mr. Beach had mentioned this a little bit earlier, but I want to restate it because it's important. The number of hours that we're proposing to study the budget is equal to the highest amount of hours in the last 5 years. And I do think it's important to say that there's no one that's trying to rush this through. Of course, there's a lot that we need to study, but I know that this committee has the capacity to be able to do so. And of course, we want to ensure that we have an appropriate amount of time and that we do a really good job. And that is the intention of our side of the bench. Mr. Beach, and I do want to reiterate as well, I want to thank Mr. Beach for offering that if we actually move right to vote, we had the potential to be able to hear from our witnesses today. I know I wanted to hear from the witnesses today, and that was not accepted by some of our opposition members. And so I do lament that, and I do hope that they do come back. Now, Mr. Saint-Marie had offered or had suggested that perhaps we move to a vote on the sub-amendment, and I would like to see whether or not the committee would be willing to do so. I do think that we've had a sufficient amount of time to discuss the sub-amendment, and I think it might be the right time for us to move to a vote.
Okay, so just before we move to MP Blakey, are we open to moving to a vote on the sub-amendment? On the sub-amendment? No? No, I'm not hearing consensus on that. So MP Zarowitz, are you done? Yes? Yeah, okay. So MP Blakey, and then MP Albus, MP Stewart.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I just suppose I want to note that, as I said earlier, if the goal is to have this legislation passed before summer, which is often a reasonable goal for a budget implementation act, then we're just kind of up against a difficult timeline no matter what. For my part, I would like to spend the time that we have, which I think this motion allows for a comparable amount of study that we've seen on other budget implementation backs going back some way. I'd like to spend that time studying the bill, but we do need to have a program for how we're going to study it. So we can't just, we do need to come to some kind of decision is what I'm saying about how we're going to study the bill. The committee can make that decision. I respect that not everyone is going to agree with the decision of the committee, but we have to be able to have a vote in order to be able to make that decision, and then we can proceed with the time that we have that is limited no matter what, at the very latest by June 23rd. But it has to be out of the House before that in order to allow it to have the time to get through the Senate. So we're talking about the difference of maybe a week or two from what's suggested in the original motion here. It's not that much of a difference in time. What we need to do is to decide how we're going to study it so that we can do that to the greatest possible effect in the time that we have. And so that's why I would certainly support moving to a vote so we can decide one way or the other on the sub-amendment, the amendment, and the main motion, and we can get to studying the bill in the time that we have to do that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, MP Blakey. I did check some historicals. It is in keeping with the amount of time that we've allowed for the studies in the past. So the hours are in keeping with what we have done in previous years. MP Blakey's asked if we call for a vote.
No. Oh, I'm still on the list, Mr. Speaker.
No. Okay, so opposition is no to that, and I've got MP Albus and then MP Stewart.
So, Mr. Chair, I know you know the standing orders very well, and some members may or may not, and so I just really would like to apply, because we've had you now canvass the room twice on whether or not we can move to the question, and members should know in this place that committees, that standing orders 116 apply, and I'll read it right here, Mr. Chair. Number one, in a standing special or legislative committee, the standing orders shall apply so far as it may be applicable, except the standing orders as the election of speaker, seconding of motions, limiting the number of times speaking, and the length of speeches. And then specifically, Section 2, which is regarding end of debate. So 2A says, unless a time limit has been adopted by the committee or by the House, the chair of a standing, special, or legislative committee may not bring a debate to an end while there are members present who still wish to participate. A decision of the chair in this regard may not be subject to an appeal to the committee. So, Mr. Chair, I don't want to bring us into a process where, you get put in a position where there are members who still want to have their piece, and then you go ahead and overrule that or see it go to a vote. Now, you wouldn't do that, I know, Mr. Chair, because B, it would lead to this. A violation of paragraph A of this section may be brought to the attention of the Speaker by any member, and the Speaker shall have the power to rule on the matter if, in the opinion of the Speaker, such violation has occurred. The Speaker may order that all subsequent proceedings in relation to the said violation be nullified. So I don't want to put you in the position, Mr. Chair, where myself as a member, because of, for whatever reason, other members wanting to hurry through a process, suddenly where I have to raise on a point of privilege in the House and have the Speaker rule on it, and then for us to come back here and essentially nullify the point and go back to the beginning of the debate. I think that would be a serious waste of everyone's time, and I think it would be not conducive to your reputation, Mr. Chair. And so I'm going to do my best to make sure I raise my hand clearly, so I get your attention. And when you canvass the room, I would hope members would take that when he asked the first time that we said no because we had members on the list, that we would just simply let him continue. Now, getting back to the motion here, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, just before Mr. Albus carries on with the rest of his remarks, on that point, which was a procedural point, I just want to say that I agree completely. I was not appealing to the chair to try and have a vote. If there are members around the table that want to continue to speak, that is their right under the rules. I'll certainly support that at this table. I was appealing to other members of the committee that we might have a vote, not to the chair. And I think what is important to recognize is that to the extent that we take more time to debate these matters as opposed to letting the committee come to a decision of whatever kind is going to emerge from the vote, that's time that we're spending debating how to proceed with the study rather than proceeding with the study itself. So my preference is not to spend the time debating how we study, but to spend the time studying. If other members feel that it's important to continue with this debate, that of course is their right. I'll be happy to support that right. I'll be happy to hear their arguments, or at least I'll hear them. But I think it is important that the committee do come to a decision, because if we're not allowed to have the vote, because members do want to continue to debate the point, what that means is a decision is effectively being made. We're deciding to have less time to study the bill than to have more time to study the bill, or through continuous debate, we're deciding not to deal with the bill at all. So, if this conversation is going to last till the end of June, then we're going to have a situation where the bill doesn't go through committee at all. If we're going to run this debate until May 20th, then we're going to have a position where we've used up a lot of valuable time that we could spend studying the bill, debating how we're going to study the bill. So to me, it is worthwhile to be able to decide these questions, by which I mean have a vote. But of course, I get that other members may disagree and they may want to use the time in other ways, and they have every right to do that. No one's questioning their right to do that. I'm questioning whether it's the right thing to do, which are, of course, two very different things. So I just wanted to be clear on that point. I thank Mr. Albus and you, Mr. Chair, for allowing me the time to be clear on that.
Thank you, MP Blake, and that was my interpretation. MP Albus, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I do always find it refreshing when someone comes to this place and wants to show deference to Parliament as an institution. Although part of me wanted to scream, debate, debate, I do think it's important for us all to be mindful that of our responsibilities to make sure that this institution is left as good, if not better off. So I do appreciate the members' approach when it comes to this. So, Mr. Chair, getting back to the sub-amendment on this, again, I just have to raise the concern about proper process and bad faith. So, while at first glance, the parliamentary secretary has brought forward a what appears to be a good faith effort to try to work with the Bloc Québécois member, the honourable member St. Marie. The challenge we have here, Mr. Chair, is this. The timeline that has been given is overwhelmingly short. Each one of these committees, and I'm a former member of INDU, for example, they have their hands full with a host of their own business. And so by making the time so short, what will legitimately happen is they will say, we've received a letter from the Honourable MP, the chair here, and in it he's saying we have to respond within a very short period of time. So members on the individual committee, be it justice, be it industry, are going to say, well, we have already worked out this plan. And so one of two things, they're going to have to abandon other important work, or, Mr. Chair, they will try to load up with extra resources that we know just do not exist. Why would I say that, Mr. Chair? Is because we do know that having proper access to translators, and this is an area that I 100% support my colleagues from Quebec and for those francophones as their first language, that they should be able to have that simultaneous translation. But as you know better than anyone, Mr. Chair, from working with the clerk, it can be very difficult. In fact, it wouldn't surprise me that the clerk has had a few times where resources has called him and said, we cannot accommodate you any further. And the Finance Committee, from my experience, has always been given a little bit more deference than other ones because it is considered one of the workhorses of this Parliament. So the very fact that we might be now loading up extra resources or having these committees say there's no way we can properly call witnesses by the 20th. Again, 11 days, colleagues. And so let's just say even if the clerk, on the instruction of the chair, after a successful conclusion, I guess a little Freudian slip there. I'm sorry, MP Lawrence, to distract you with that. But, you know, a conclusion of today's committee would end up basically where if a letter was to go out today and those things would be put to the next meeting, you would have to have witnesses called. You'd have to actually have a business meeting. Pardon me, Mr. Chair, I'm not even doing things sequentially, and you deserve better than that. So number one, you would need to have a business meeting called, and then you would have to have a call for witnesses, and those witnesses all would have to be at hearings that would happen before the 20th. Now, a good question for MP Beach or perhaps Ste. Marie, because we've found out through this process that the clause by clause will not be done by these individual committees. It'll be us. So, again, are they supposed to write a report? Are we supposed to kind of tune in and listen to the concerns of those MPs? The Conservatives, we've already planned for this. We already said, okay, this is what the Finance Committee has decided to do a pre-study. And so we'll be bringing our critics here. And we put forward a number of witnesses. Now, I'm glad to hear that there will be flexibility granted by the clerk, I should say by the chair, confirmed by the clerk, that we will be able to ask questions even if a section has been designated out. But again, there's going to be a lot of coordination issues that come to this. So, Mr. Chair, in summation on, you know, the amendment, or the sub-amendment, I believe is what we're debating here. This would be Mr. Beach's amendment to the amendment. Is that correct?
We are speaking to the sub-amendment to the amendment.
Yes. Okay. So the sub-amendment to the amendment, to me, again, at the surface level, seems like it is a good faith exercise, and unfortunately, it's not. Now, again, that's not on behalf of Mr. Beach. I know that he has a job to do. In fact, Mr. Chair, I used to joke as a former parliamentary secretary, people would ask what I did, and I said, well, there's really two types of parliamentary secretaries, and they both burn shoe leather. One shines the shoes of their minister, and the other one gets work done. So I'll let Mr. Beach decide which one he is. But in regards to this, again, the good faith nature of Mr. Ste. Marie's original amendment was to have a thoughtful scrutiny of several areas of C-19. And just on C-19, I think it's important to get on the record, Mr. Chair, because I've been raising concerns right from the very beginning. You will remember better than anyone. We had, not in this room, but in front of this committee, we had officials from finance. And I had asked specifically, because we had a technical briefing by the parliamentary secretary on the Ways and Means motion. Then I asked the officials specifically to that, was everything that was covered in that technical briefing in C-19? And they said no. There was other additions. So we still have yet, Mr. Chair, I believe, to hear back from Finance, which is raising questions. But I'll also tell you what else concerns me, is the copy that I have in this place is what I received as a courtesy copy. Now, I went online, Mr. Chair, and actually found that there was a whole section from page 421 on that simply cuts off. So here's page 421 in my copy, and notice it just goes blank. So for me to actually find out at this late juncture, Mr. Chair, that there is a large amount of clauses in here, and even some charts and some areas in regards to duties on vaping products, remote communities qualifying flights, and then a whole schedule, Mr. Chair, on table of weeks of benefits for seasonal workers. I got to say, this process by this government has not been a good one. And that's where I see a pattern. Now, you know, Nixon used to say something like that he was paranoid, but people were actually going after him. Well, Mr. Chair, I guess I'm paranoid, but I actually have a pattern here where we see time and time again, where the government gives you a courtesy copy, but it's not the whole bill. Where the government does a technical briefing, it's not the whole bill. Now, the parliamentary secretary has done a sub-amendment to a good faith initiative by St. Marie, and it is not in good faith, Mr. Chair. So these are all huge challenges that I think members of Parliament have faced in this process.
Listen, I'm just going to interject. The bill is complete online, so just check with the
Yeah,
analysts.
I recognize that.
The bill
but,
is all there. Yeah.
Yeah, but and this is no bearing on you, Mr. Chair. But again, when I received a copy, and again there was a nice bounding process with it, and I started going through it, I went through page after page after page because I couldn't get a clear answer if the Ways and Means motion was the exact same as C-19. And we know from finance officials it wasn't. But again, the courtesy copy that MPs were given in the opposition lobby, not again your fault, Mr. Chair, not reflective on the clerk or anyone other than the government. I've actually looked into doing a point of privilege, but you know what, Mr. Chair? It's already been said by the Speaker that these are considered courtesy copies. Well, I tell you what, a courtesy copy that is not the whole bill, when we find out that the technical briefing does not cover the whole bill, and then to have a sub-amendment that actually allows for no clause-by-clause consideration by these committees that are actually far more versed in these things, Mr. Chair. That's why, again, I think Conservatives have said that we will simply bring in our critics, that we believe that we can do most of the work to hold the scrutiny to account, but we object, and I say categorically object, Mr. Chair, to a parliamentary secretary bringing in a motion only to have a good faith exercise amendment by our colleagues, MP St. Marie, to then find out that they are going to add a sub-amendment that actually, Mr. Chair, does not do what it is intended to do. It is simply a deflection by the government. This is another step in a bad faith process, Mr. Chair, and I'm sorry that I have to see it because the Finance Committee is one of the finest committees I've served on. We had multiple witnesses that were supposed to speak here today, and I do hope that they are not personally insulted. That and again, we had many members decide to do points of orders or making reference in their comments, Mr. Chair. So I hope I'm not going to get point of ordered or interrupted by anyone when I say this. They said specifically that if we just stopped talking, we could go hear them. But that's not what occurred, Mr. Chair. We would have had to either cut their time to be able to speak their minds in their presentations, or we would have had members here that never would have gotten the chance. Had members supported my motion to adjourn the debate, Mr. Chair, I think we would have been all better off having heard from those testimonies in full, and then we could simply discuss the business of the committee, such as this particular amendment put forward by the parliamentary secretary. So, Mr. Chair, I've said a number of times today that from the way that this government operates, that parliamentary secretaries have again started to move in what I feel is a interventionist way, that now we have where the parliamentary secretary is actually now trying to push out work that, and try to direct other committees so that he and his minister can look like they're making good faith efforts, I think is a real shame and needs to be called out for that. So, Mr. Chair, I've made a number of points here. I do hope that Liberal members are right now pulling out their phones and are right now texting to Terry Beach saying, MP Beach, this particular motion is not what we think it is. Maybe we should think about removing it. And then maybe we should go back to MP St. Marie, who has already said that he has other amendments to try to make this process from his viewpoint better, Mr. Chair. So I do hope that members, especially those Liberal members, are reconsidering my arguments and are making their own arguments directed to the Parliamentary Secretary and asking the Parliamentary Secretary to put them in charge. Because at one point, this Liberal government, when it was in its sunny ways, Mr. Chair, approach, now, as my colleague from Abbotsford has said, they're now in the spendy ways approach, where they're trying to boss around committees to push through billions of dollars of spending that, quite honestly, will not be reviewed in the proper way that it should. So, Mr. Chair, I'm going to put it at an end of that. I'm happy to answer any questions that other members may have to me. But again, I have to say that process has to be fair. And this particular deception by the Parliamentary Secretary, he's been given a hard task. It's a hard task being Parliamentary Secretary. It's a hard task being the Minister of Finance and the Deputy Prime Minister's Parliamentary Secretary. But we have to call it out as we see it. Thank you.
MP Albus, we've got MP Stewart, MP Blakey, MP Sainte-Marie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When you think of Mr. St. Marie's amendment, I mean, what he really wanted to do was drill down into the aspects of the bill that covered industry, international trade, human rights, immigration. I think he was certainly, obviously caring about those issues in good faith, caring about the issues as they would face his constituents in his riding and across the country. But I think today, when you look at the sub-amendment from the Parliamentary Secretary, it's very clear that it's just another distraction from the government. And the government, I mean, they need distractions because there's a pending RCMP investigation on the Prime Minister for accepting a $216,000 illegal trip from a lobbyist. There's also the CRA whistleblowers, Mr. Chair, which obviously wanted to do their work honestly, and nobody was protecting them.
Point of order.
Are we still not speaking to the sub-amendment, or are we speaking to something else now?
I'm on the sub-amendment. I just was making reference.
MP Stewart. Yep.
Nothing to do with the sub-amendment right now, Mr. Chair. Nothing to do with the sub-amendment.
MP Stewart.
Point of order.
Point of order, MP Albus.
You know what, Mr. Chair, I find that you are the chair, and you should be making the ruling, not other members.
MP Stewart, just focus on the sub-amendment, please.
Yeah, I will. Mr. Chair, you see, what I was saying is that Mr. St. Marie's interest in the bill, I thought was legitimate, and I think his ideas were in good faith in accordance with his constituents and with the issues that matter to him. He was looking at, in his original amendment, industry, international trade, human rights, and immigration, and dividing them up and looking at them separately in the committees that hold those priorities. I think his effort was responsible for the most part. And the sub-amendment from the Parliamentary Secretary, what I was actually indicating is that I believe my colleague, Mr. Albus, called it a deflection. I used the word distraction on the sub-amendment. I'm speaking directly to the sub-amendment. And in order for me to do my job, Mr. Chair, when I'm making a point on the sub-amendment about the fact that I believe it's a distraction, I cited the $216,000 illegal trip that the Prime Minister accepted from a lobbyist.
Order. Point of order.
Nothing to do with the sub-amendment.
MP Stewart, please stick to the sub-amendment.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Point of order.
I believe we are given a wide purview with respect to when we are talking in committee, and he was referencing the reason why there might be a distraction technique, and it was within the scope there. So with respect, Mr. Chair, I believe that Mr. Stewart's comments were within his wide purview.
MP Lawrence,
I have certainly been here
thank you
for
for that,
many
MP
liberal
Lawrence. Yeah.
filibusters when
I
they
am
have
listening.
gone
I am
off on
listening
wild
within that wide
tangents.
scope. I am listening within that wide scope to stick to the sub amendment and the amendment. MP Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So back to my original idea. Basically, St. Marie's motion was in accordance with his interests and the issues that matter to him. The sub amendment of which I'm referring to now, when a political party at a committee hearing puts forth a sub amendment to an amendment, there's always a route for that maneuver. We all do it. Every political party has, this is something that happens at committee. It's perfectly legal. It happens at every committee. And what I was just stating is that the government, in my opinion, and the opinion of many Canadians, would have legitimate reasons to implement deflection or distraction to the issues at hand. Because in my role as National Revenue Shadow Minister, for the opposition, I mean, obviously I have to be here at Finance Committee. I have to look at this sub-amendment, but I also have to know why I think it's coming out. And when the Prime Minister is potentially being investigated, when whistleblowers are saying they're not protected,
Point of
I
order,
believe
Mr.
that's where
Chair.
distraction
Point of order.
comes in.
MP
Nothing
Stewart.
to do with
Yeah.
the amendment at all.
Again, MP Stewart, sticking to the sub amendment to the amendment.
Yeah, Mr. Chair.
We're discussing timelines.
Yeah,
we're discussing the study.
I hear
That's
you.
where it says the timelines and the study. That is the sub amendment and the amendment to the main motion.
I really appreciate that, Mr. Chair. It's great to get that settled. I mean, obviously, the sub-amendment is what I'm referring to, and I believe the sub-amendment, speaking directly to the sub-amendment, is a distraction from the obstacles faced by the government. I could continue to list that trip over and over, but it hurts a lot of feelings, so I'll leave that part out. There was no economic impact assessment. Rushing the bill through committee when there's $57 billion in new spending, especially when several economists have said no new spending is necessary in the country. If you look at that alone, you can see why this sub-amendment to rush this to the date of May 20th, which is the date I believe I see here in the email I received. May 20th is only 11 days away. Only probably 7 or 8 of those are business days. That's not a lot of time when you're talking about $57 billion. I was also, Mr. Chair, when studying the bill, looking at the direct and control aspects of it, many charities were prohibited from or obstructed, from being able to fundraise during the pandemic. I mean, we've all dealt with charitable organizations, and some of these charities right now operating around the globe, although Canadian charities, because of the direct and control legislation we already have, they're facing increased costs and increased timelines. So the jobs and the projects they're working on are not getting done to code, and it's taking longer and costing more. So that was certainly something where there's already a bill before the House. There's also the Canadians for Taxpayer Fairness, which I believe they were coming here today, and I know they liked my motion because they know the bill isn't cutting it, and the NDP has pandered to them for years, but clearly threw them out the window when they decided to form a coalition with the government. So if you look at the
Stewart,
sub-amendment,
Please, MP Stewart, just focus on the sub-amendment, the amendment, and the main motion.
Yeah,
So
I can hear
the
something,
sub-amendment,
but-
the amendment speaks to the
Yeah.
timelines, and what we'll be studying, MP Stewart.
Mr. Chair, I can't hear. There's a lot of verbiage from the NDP because there's a lot of hurt feelings
Encouraging
about that
remarks,
comment.
Mr. Chair. This is a
I
lot of
mean-
encouraging.
I mean, I
A lot of
know they all
encouragement.
go to caucus
That's all.
together and have to get along. I get it, but I just have to get back to what I'm doing here because the sub amendment is the most important, isn't it? And so, when you go back to the beginning, you have the wine producers are upset. You have directed control issues around the country. You have an NDP Liberal coalition. You have RCMP investigations for paid illegal trips by lobbyists. And then you have this sub-amendment to poor Mr. St. Marie's. Mr. St. Marie was literally trying to look at industry, international trade, human rights, and immigration issues, which we are all facing in our constituency offices. Let's face it, if you're an MP in this country, you have immigration files that are seriously backed up. You have people trying to get a passport that have been waiting 3 months for it. It's unbelievable, unprecedented, actually, what we're dealing with in our constituency offices. And I noticed, regardless of...
Point of order,
Point of
Mr.
order.
Chair.
MP Zerowitz.
Can we please speak to the sub-amendment, not passport offices or what's happening in our constituency offices? Thank you.
MP Stewart, again, to the sub-amendment, the amendment. And a point of order, MP Blake?
On the same point of order, I mean, you know, I think Mr. Stewart is trying to make an argument. I have confidence he'll come back to the sub-amendment. I think we've seen multiple points of orders today on relevance. I'm not sure that they're helping debate. My hope is that we'll give Mr. Stewart his time, and that eventually he will exhaust his point, and we'll know better what that point is once he's done making it. I think we're still in the process of discovering his point. I look forward to hearing it and then proceeding to a vote once he's satisfied that he's made his point. And I think interrupting him will only serve to prolong the experience, something which I would rather not see done. Thank you.
Thank you, MP Blakey, that as we look to the sub-amendment and the amendment, and we're in a discovery mode here. And MP Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Like, I mean, you know, some of us were, like, with respect to the sub-amendment, we have to look at the processes that we're using here at committee, and I haven't felt that all of them were fair. That's my opinion, of course. I know I'm entitled to that, unless, of course, I get censored by Bill 11 or something. But you know, Mr. Chair, with the sub-amendment, back to the root of all this. I mean, we're looking at May 20th is the date that the government, that the coalition wants to, you know, put the sub-amendment in. May 20th is really, really soon. And part of our job here as members of Parliament and committee members is to put proper oversight onto spending, obviously, Finance Committee. But we're talking about $57 billion of new spending that the majority of economists in the country say is not necessary due to the influx of printed money over the past 2 years. So when I look at the sub-amendment, and when I think of what the original amendment intended, to look at immigration and human rights, international trade, and industry, I mean, we all have in our constituency offices constituents that have issues with the Competition Act, and I have issues of directing control with certain charities, and I do have a small vineyard as well. I certainly wouldn't have as many as some of the members on the committee and in the House.
MP Stewart. MP Zerowitz, did you just put your hand up to be on the list, or? Okay. I didn't see if that was a legacy on MP Stewart. Continue, please.
Yeah, so I guess with respect to the sub-amendment, I think the Liberals certainly need a distraction from the many investigations, you know, particularly the one on the paid trip by the lobbyist.
Please stick to the sub-amendment, the amendment.
Okay. Mr. Chair, I just think it was like a billionaire on an island, and it was a lobbyist. It's quite a juicy story for the Canadian public. And if I got to believe that having a nice deflection is a pretty sweet deal for the Prime Minister right now. But here at committee, dealing with $57 billion of new spending with no economic impact assessment, with several groups that are clearly at odds with the government's economic plan. We know there's no monetary policy with this government. There never has been. I think I just can't support this the way it is because it's too soon. May 20th is just too soon for us to put proper oversight onto this, and I think that's I'd be glad to answer any questions if anybody else had, but that's all from me for today, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, MP Stewart. MP Blakey.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I didn't realize I was on your list.
You are on, I've got MP
I'm
Blakely.
happy to get to a vote sooner.
Okay, I have MP Sainte-Marie, then MP
Oui,
Chambers,
merci.
then MP Fast. MP Sainte-Marie.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To respond to the question that Dan brought up, if the bill is separated and goes to the committees, each committee has to make a report back to us before we go ahead to the clause by clause. So yes, that puts more pressure in a short time, but otherwise I want to thank them because I am using the paper version. It can't, all of those pages can't be read on the screen. And for me, it stops at 421.2, whereas the document online is 440 pages. It's the first time that I noted this, that it's not the same thing, and that's very serious. So I'd like to thank them for that information. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
MP Chambers and MP Fast.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I think at its initial purpose, the motion and then the sub-amendment, my biggest challenge is the timeline that it's imposing. And we're being asked as a committee to hold ourselves to a timeline before we've actually even had the opportunity to hear from any witnesses. And all we have are what some people stakeholders are sending in. We know there's no economic study, and that's been raised here as well. I'm going to, Mr. Chair, I'm always short, but I'll try to be brief as well in my comments. Previously, when this House has been asked to push through legislation quickly, we had some mistakes, fairly significant mistakes, and things that went a little bit unnoticed for some time, including the SNC issue that was raised because that was put into a budget bill and wasn't really, combed through as properly as it could have been because we were on a tight timeline then, or that Parliament was on a tight timeline then. We've spent time in that main chamber debating and fixing legislation that came out of the pandemic. A good example is the GIS benefits, because that was a mistake that was not caught by committee or by any stakeholders before it was passed. It wasn't until the NDP, to their credit, after the budget bill passed, realized that there was a problem. So I'm just wondering, this time, what is it going to be? I suspect there will be some issues around the competition law policy. I made the mention before that typically what you would see is a consultation, then a consultation on the proposed amendments. And here we're just skipping right through it. I'll quote from a law firm that has some experience in competition policy that says, despite the significance of the proposed amendments and the deliberate policy choices they entail, it is notable that these proposals have not been developed through public consultation with stakeholders, a process that has been used before and has been requested again by members of the Canadian Competition Law Bar. And just last week, representatives from Industry Canada indicated that the Competition Law Bar, or the CBA, have not been consulted on these draft rules. Now, I am interested in... Oh, sorry, Mr. Chair, were you trying to get in, or?
Well, MP Chambers, it looks like the bells have started, so I am going to ask members for unanimous consent to continue.
No.
We do not have unanimous consent.
I was just getting started, but I was going to be brief, I promise.
Okay, so we will suspend.